Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on community-led rural safety strategies. I am Senzegile Bengu, and I am a researcher in the Justice and Violence Prevention Program at the Institute for Security Studies, and I co-convene the Violence Prevention Forum. I will be chairing today's webinar. And before we start, please note that this is a public event being broadcast live on YouTube. Therefore, Chatham House rules do not apply. In today's webinar, we will hear from three speakers representing three organizations that have been working actively and deliberately to address safety and development challenges in rural areas across South Africa. As we know, at the beginning of the year, rural safety in South Africa received widespread media attention, driven by claims of white genocide, which have since been proven false. The debate was deeply polarized, and it centered strongly on the problem of violence and crime. And the dominant story became how violent we all are as a society. That narrative creates incorrect perceptions and fuels extremism. Yes, South Africa does have high levels of violence, with one of the highest murder rates in the world. However, violence is a global social problem, not unique to South Africa. Also, violence does not occur everywhere all the time, but it often happens in specific areas at specific times under specific conditions. Studies of violence have shown that it is a complex challenge that is deeply influenced by the context and socioeconomic conditions in which it occurs. For example, if we look at South Africa, half of the murders occur in just 12% of police precincts. And the high murder areas are townships and the metros, which are densely populated. And often this challenge of violence feels overwhelming, but there are solutions. Violence is preventable, and there are various efforts across the country aimed at building safe and prosperous communities. However, these efforts often get overshadowed by headlines and narrative at the beginning of the year. As the Violence Prevention Forum, we decided to convene 4 webinars to share examples of violence prevention efforts and the lessons that they offer on how we can build safe and prosperous communities. Today is our first webinar in the series, and it will focus on community-led rural safety strategies. And discussions on rural communities often center around agriculture or poverty challenges. And our panel today is somewhat unique, as we seldom hear from an agricultural association and an NGO in one panel. This was done deliberately because we want to show that rural communities are diverse and that different stakeholders have roles to play in addressing safety and development challenges. Rural areas in South Africa, as we know, still face severe socioeconomic challenges. In a 2020 Stats SA report on child poverty, which looked at multidimensional poverty, and this is a measurement of poverty that looks at how deprived children are when it comes to 7 dimensions. And those are sanitation and drinking water, housing, nutrition, safety, health, access to information, and education. The reports showed that 61% of children in South Africa were multidimensionally poor. More concerning was that 88% of children living in rural areas faced multidimensional poverty, compared to 41% of children who live in urban areas. This is more than double and way higher than the national average. So I believe we cannot build safe and prosperous countries and communities without talking about rural safety and development. Achieving this will require the whole of society to work deliberately and sustainably to address socioeconomic challenges like poverty and unemployment, which drive violence in our country. And it will also require us intentionally building bridges between communities and different sectors. We know that the government and the police cannot address the country's safety and security challenges alone. And that's why I'm excited about today's presentations, because they offer practical examples from rural communities on how we can collectively address these challenges. And as the Violence Prevention Forum, we were also founded on this understanding that shifting systems towards preventing violence in South Africa will require meaningful and trusting relationships between different sectors. We are a network of over 250 national NGOs, researchers, policymakers, development partners, and the private sector who have come together to share knowledge and research, as well as programs and interventions that work to prevent violence that are evidence informed, which can be scaled up. And we have been going for 10 years, and we have seen how investing in building trust and bridges can change the system. And I've asked my colleague Andisiwe, who's joining us today, to just share a policy brief on the lessons that we've learned as the VPF on multi-sectoral collaboration. And with that, let us begin. Our webinar today is going to be an hour and a half, and we intend to spend the next 90 minutes having a discussion. Therefore, we encourage engagement in the chat and in the Zoom room. We will spend the first 40 minutes hearing from our speakers. Each of them will share for 10 minutes. And after the final speaker, we will open up to a Q&A from the audience. In the meantime, please ensure that your microphone is off until we get to the Q&A. And if you can, please keep your camera on, as it would be lovely to talk to a room full of humans. With that, I would like to introduce our first speaker on the panel. Our first speaker is Lynette Parsons. Lynette is the Managing Director at Lima Rural Development Foundation, where she has worked for 20 years. She is an agricultural economist with deep experience in smallholder farmer support, agricultural marketing, land reform, and rural development. Lynette is also Lima's public employment program manager, including National Youth Services and Social Employment Fund, and working on creating meaningful work opportunities for unemployed youth in education, food security, and in health. And with a deep understanding of both technical and social dimensions of development, Lynette continues to drive Lima's mission of empowering rural communities through sustainable and inclusive development practices. And in her presentation, she'll also speak more about the work of Lima Rural Development. And with that, we really look forward to your input, Lynette, and over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just sharing my presentation quickly and then we'll get going. Right. Okay, as I was very warmly introduced, I'm Lynette Parsons, Lima's Managing Director. Just as an introduction, I'd like to let everyone know and understand a bit about Lima. We were established in 1989 as a non-governmental, non-profit organization. Our head offices are based in Pietermaritzburg in KwaZulu-Natal, but we are engaged in projects all over the country and have a national footprint. Our projects cover a broad range of rural development initiatives throughout South Africa, and Lima's actively implementing projects in the areas of agriculture, food security, social development, learning support, engineering and housing, environments, land reform, community-based training, as well as the public health sector. Lima also acts as a comprehensive rural development resource, providing administration, project management, and participatory planning services at community levels. A little bit about our approach. Lima is committed to ensuring that rural and marginalized communities are not only included in development efforts, but actively are involved and help shape them. We have a process called a participatory rural appraisal, which was developed back in the 80s in India, which is a series of workshops in which we create safe spaces for community members to express their needs, their priorities, and their ideas. These workshops allow for inclusive planning that reflects real lived experiences, and we don't come along with our own ideas and initiatives and impose them onto communities. Each community also has a dedicated Lima facilitator, which we embed on the ground into the communities on a full-time basis. This helps us build trust, listen deeply, and provide support on a continuous basis, and empowers change at the hands of the people that are most affected. Community involvement, when designed in a community-based approach program, is critical to the success of project implementation. We have 4 foundation pillars which we feel are critical in order to achieve this. The first is, as I mentioned earlier, through our participatory rural appraisals, which are community workshops, focusing on the community's social and economic conditions, survival strategies, and livelihood responses. We understand and work very closely with the local and traditional authorities to get their support and understanding the political landscape and the community dynamics in which we are working. This gains tremendous support for the program's implementation initiatives. We know that alone Lima can't make all the differences, and working with stakeholders is absolutely critical. Knowing who we're working with and what support is available, and developing collaborative relationships for maximum community impact for all stakeholders and community members. We embed facilitators depending on what type of project. It could be an agricultural facilitator or a social facilitator or a health facilitator into these communities where we are trying to make change. In the communities, they are able to develop long-term relationships and bring about institutional change. Just a few of our development programs, which we feel have a far greater reach than just the sector in which they are functional in. They have a much deeper impact on communities as a whole. In our agricultural space, we run farmer support programs, predominantly with smallholder farmers. In this program, we do training in crop and livestock production, and we assist communities and farmers with inputs, extension services, and farmer group formations. Food security is very close to Lima's heart. We provide support to community and household gardens, as well as have a huge drive on nutritional education at a community level. We have developed seedling nurseries and agri-hubs, which also help support local food systems. On the education side, we provide support into the learning space, working very closely with early childhood development programs, setting up ECD centers, doing upgrades and refurbishments on the infrastructure, as well as training of the practitioners. This really helps support children's growth, development, and school readiness at a community level. Within the social space, Lima works with many programs. Recently, we are working with the Social Employment Fund, which is funded through the IDC, which allows work opportunities for local participants within communities. Here we conduct PRA workshops and embed a facilitator into the area to help manage and support these communities. These programs really have a strong support focus on women, youth, and identifying and providing services and support into vulnerable households. On the environmental side, Lima works on a range of environmental projects. We work in a program called Herding for Health, which is a rangeland restoration program. Here we're looking at climate resilience and sustainable land use ideas and programs, and also including water and sanitation type initiatives. Lima has an embedded engineering division within us, which often overlays onto many of our programs, like doing infrastructure at the agricultural level and ECD buildings. But we've also worked in the housing and infrastructure space. And as Senzi was saying earlier, often it's access to these basic services that is critical for communities. We've supported programs that do rural housing, water supply and sanitation systems, as well as infrastructure upgrades to ECD centers and community centers. So Lima believes that it's the social benefits, the benefits that are often difficult to record, difficult to put a KPI or a target to, that are really the true spin-offs of our programs, that often drive the big change that we're trying to see within our society. Our programs allow communities really to be heard, understood, and supported and enabled to make the changes on their own, rather than for it to be imposed on them through policies and ideas that come from external sources. Some of the key social benefits we really identify within our communities is around improved livelihoods. We help communities grow their income through farming, small businesses, and job creation. We feel that communities that have better food security often are more secure in not just food supply, but secure as a whole community operating together. In our food security space, we are supporting communities with crop production, livestock, and home gardens, enabling them to feed themselves at a community level. Another social benefit we feel is very strong is supporting families in childhood development. This is often done through our ECD and social support programs. Children are better cared for and parents are more involved and empowered in order to care for their children. Our programs very often specifically target and include marginalized groups within our communities, specifically looking at women and their needs and their role in the community, youth who, as we know, often are sitting at home unemployed and demotivated, and trying to grow them as young people coming into society. And vulnerable individuals. We do a lot of baseline surveys right at the beginning of our programs on a broad scale within communities to identify who are the vulnerable households and individuals that really need focus. And we provide them with skills, confidence, and access to opportunities. Basic services, or basic human needs and basic services within communities is a space that we feel Lima plays a big role. We help with water, sanitation, infrastructure upgrades, which leads to healthier communities. Job creation and skill development remains a key focus within South Africa. And I think many of our programs are driving to try and create more employment. Programs like our Social Employment Fund, SEF, offers meaningful work and practical skills that are preparing people for long-term employment and developing of their own enterprises. But more than that, this meaningful work happens at a community level, addressing needs that the communities themselves have identified as key areas for improvement. We also focus on community strengthening. This is capacity building, building unity, leadership, local ownership, helping communities drive their own developmental sustainability. These are the social benefits Lima really has outlined as being almost knock-on effect social impacts from programs that might initially start off as very specifically focused to one sector or one area of development. I'd like to take you through a few of these programs just to give you an idea of how they operate and how they deliver what KPIs they set to do, and how the social cohesion of communities is addressed through them. I'll start off with the Social Employment Fund, which I've referred to a few times. This is a fund, this is a program that is funded through the IDC, and it really creates meaningful work opportunities, focusing on serving the public good rather than individuals' needs. It aims to address high levels of unemployment, particularly with youth and women, while also strengthening communities through purposeful work. Participants receive training and support while contributing to important social needs such as health, nutrition, food security, basic services, and enterprise development. Through this approach, CEF not only provides income to individuals and into communities, but it also builds skills, confidence, and resilience within communities. Just a bit of outcomes of the program to date and the impact we've had. We have over 2,000 participants trained and placed in meaningful community roles. We have done surveys on about 28,000 households, of which 26,000 came up as or indicated as vulnerable households within that survey. Quite a staggering figure when you look at it and dive into what vulnerability really means for people. The program has three main focus areas. We work in the health and nutrition space. We do a lot of growth monitoring of babies and children under the age of 5, looking for malnourished children and children in need of referrals to clinics. Hand in hand with that, we do a lot of caregiver education and training, specifically on sort of nutrition and childhood development, the adherence to the Road to Health booklet that the department hands out. Just on that point, it is quite encouraging that the Road to Health book has been very well adhered to by most of our participants in the program. Something we thought we wouldn't find, but has been seen as something that mothers and communities are adhering to. And we also provide support directly to the local clinics. Many of our rural clinics don't have the capacity that they need for the demand of their service, and we provide support into that space. Food security and agriculture, we've developed 157 community gardens. These gardens provide nutrients and food straight back to the vulnerable households in which we've identified. And we also look at developing food gardens at vulnerable households. And to date, we've done 4,000 gardens at households. We've also looked at the need for inputs and have looked at developing seedling nurseries within communities to provide that input directly and cost effectively. The entrepreneurial space is a very interesting one and seems to be one growing in leaps and bounds within South Africa as being an avenue to helping people overcome poverty and developing businesses within communities that really can support the needs of those communities. To date, we've supported through training and set up 148 micro enterprises, and we've trained about 900 participants in basic business training. And this training is really a training model that encourages people to get out of their comfort zones and seek what is opportunities around them, rather than maybe just seeking employment as their solution. I'd like to move on to our other program, which is probably, as the name Lima implies, it was the backbone of all our Lima work for the last 35, 36 years. And that has been around support programs into the agricultural sector and specifically focusing on smallholder farmers in rural areas. The program is enhancing agricultural productivity and production, and really has a big effect and benefit on local economies and communities. There are 4 areas here I'd like to zone in on and chat to you about this morning. One is around community resilience. Our agricultural support programs enhance community resilience through fostering reliance, diversifying livelihoods, and ensuring food security and promoting sustainable resource management practices. Often land and the availability of agricultural land in communities is one of the resources that they have often at hand, and allowing them the opportunity to develop that and grow the agricultural space within their community has huge benefits. Our agricultural programs bring on social cohesion. Community-led development programs strengthen our social cohesion and foster collaboration, trust, and mutual support amongst community members, promoting solidarity and collective action. Obviously, if we can develop agriculture within the rural local space, we're also going to be developing economic growth, and not just the growth at the farmer, but the knock-on value chain growth that also happens right down to the consumer. So our agri support stimulates local economic growth by creating jobs, generating income, fostering entrepreneurship, and boosting markets across the small scale producers. The fourth one I'd like to talk about is in community empowerment. So using integrated community development programs really empowers communities by providing them knowledge, resources, and opportunities, enabling active participation, decision-making, and leadership in local development initiatives. And this often spins off further than just agriculture. It spins off into the way that the whole community is led by having this knowledge that often is started at an agricultural program level. So enterprise development is a space that we feel not only addresses unemployment, but provides livelihood opportunities. Lima's enterprise development initiatives really focuses on youth and children to move beyond youth and women to move beyond their comfort zones and take charge of their economic futures. This often starts by just understanding where you are at the moment to be able to take a step forward into the future. Through our entrepreneurship training and mentorship, participants are equipped to start and sustain their own income-generating activities, which does help address unemployment and often creates additional jobs, and as well as benefiting the community with services. We run a program called the Street Business School, which is our training program, which we conduct at participant level. And we've also been involved in the National Youth Service Program, focusing on this mindset shift, practical business skills, and confidence building. Our program doesn't end at training. We feel that training alone often doesn't provide the impact that you're looking for. All of our programs have both a training component as well as a mentorship or post-training support program, in which businesses are then supported and shown how to achieve what they would like to set out to achieve, rather than just leave them with a piece of paper and a certificate after training. We've also partnered with organizations like the Ellen and Jill Gray Foundation, a philanthropist type organization, to expand our resources, networks, and opportunities. Our ED programs are an integration of both this training and mentorship, which results in the SMME being able to facilitate action and sustainable growth. When putting the presentation together, sometimes the best way to tie all the pieces together is to go through a case study, just to give an example of how all of this comes together and how it can have meaningful impact and change at a community level. Lima's been working in a municipality called Kaimar, which is in the Northern Cape, where we've been providing support through one of the independent power producers, implementing a livelihood support program in 3 very isolated rural communities, very close to the Namibian border. In this area, it's very limited in terms of livelihood opportunities, and the vast majority of the communities are unemployed and mainly depending on seasonal agricultural labor or public employment programs for their income. Like so many communities, there are high incidences of substance abuse, school dropouts, and domestic abuse. Lima approaches its development intervention in an integrated manner, looking both at livelihood creations and skills development as possible solutions for the challenges that these communities face. We introduced a youth economic linkages program, a farmer support program, and provided enterprise development, as well as activate AVP type training, alternatives to violence training. Lima also invited other organizations, some that were part of SEF's ecosystem, to invest employment opportunities, resources, and skills which also included food security, literacy development, and training. Lima is a great advocacy of light hands make many, what? Work makes many light hands. I can't remember how it goes, but having lots and lots of people working on the same platform, driving the initiative forward is a better idea than trying to go at it alone. There are so many stakeholders out there that can be involved. So this intervention has taken place now over 2 years, and here are some of the sort of stats and the outcomes and the areas where we can see change happening. So access to short-term employment opportunities. We've employed 130 youth through the Social Employment Fund. This was in partnership with the Groot Gedag Trust, which is operational in the Northern Cape and do fantastic work. We've had 34 community members being trained in literacy facilitation, who are linked now to the ECD centres in the area, and households to encourage the Love to Read program. We have a total of 67 smallholder farmers. These are mainly livestock farmers that are being supported with livestock management, and they've received training and irrigation infrastructure. We have 54 youth that have been trained and mentored in enterprise development, and are running their little businesses very successfully within the communities. There's a total of 91 youth that have been linked to economic opportunities. Some of these are within and some are outside the municipality borders. And we have 11 new businesses being registered and 4 supported with inputs from other institutions and that are fully operational. We have 14 individuals that have been trained in AVP, alternatives to violence methodologies. And this methodology has 5 central pillars: affirmation, communication, cooperation, community building, and creative conflict resolution. So the above integrated social and livelihoods program has, over a very short period of 2 years, had far greater impact than the KPIs I've listed above. The social cohesion and impact has been significant. And although often difficult to really qualify and quantify through KPIs and numbers and stats, it can be seen and heard within the communities as we engage with them. And for me, this is really the true outcome that one is wanting within a program. 2 years is a very short period, and we have a very long way still to go within these communities. But it is a start, and at least it is pulling in the right direction. So in conclusion, at Lima, our work across agric, food security, education, social development, enterprise, and infrastructure does way more than just uplift livelihoods. It really addresses the deepest social and economic inequalities that often fuel violence within a community. Gender-based violence, substance abuse, and other forms of harm are not isolated events or incidences. They are symptoms of broken systems where poverty, unemployment, exclusion, and real powerlessness persists. By creating meaningful opportunities, strengthening these social support systems, and giving people a voice, we help restore dignity and purpose, and most importantly, in my opinion, hope. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lynette. Wow. It's so inspiring to hear about the work that you have been doing as Lima and just how you are living into the word, the naming of the organization. At the beginning of the webinar, we were just discussing how Lima, meaning ukulima in isiZulu, which translates to sowing or planting, and you are planting these seeds in communities, as you said, of hope and empowering communities. And I'm sure there are reflections and questions that we hope will come during the Q&A. And I would like to now introduce our second panelist, Dr. Kathy Hurley, who is a director and co-founder of GeneSmart. GeneSmart is a consulting company aimed at providing sustainable solutions to complex rural challenges. sustainable in terms of resource utilization and economic viability, and their work focuses on creating and supporting agri-entrepreneurs and focuses on women and youth as well, working with organized agriculture, private sector funders, and other agri-chain partners and collaborators. Dr. Hurley has knowledge and experience in agriculture, primarily in the sugarcane industry, spanning over 30 years, and she sits on the board of a number of agricultural associations, including Agri-SA and Guanalu. And today she will be speaking on behalf of Guanalu, and in her presentation, she'll be showcasing how their work has used agriculture as a common ground to provide a space to build trust, restore dignity as well, and respect to youth and women. And we really look forward to your input, Kathy, and over to you.
Absolutely. Let's just get the presentation going. There we go. All right, everybody comfortable? All can see, Sensi, all good?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. That didn't really come to me, but it came to the CEO of Guanalu, Sandy Lamarck. But unfortunate circumstances took her away today, so she was unable to do the presentation. But I feel very honored that I can represent her and represent Guanalu with the presentation today. So thank you very much. I'll be taking a slightly different approach to what Lynette has done, and that's probably what you wanted me to do anyway. And because I'll start first of all with what Guanalu actually is. So a little bit for the audience so that they understand that I'm speaking on behalf of the KwaZulu-Natal Agricultural Union, shortly known as Guanalu. And I'll start off with just a couple of objectives that the organization follows. First of all, just to let everyone know that it's an autonomous, non-government, non-profit, voluntary organizations of farmers. And these are both large-scale, small-scale, deep rural, more commercial, as well as rural citizens, united to analyze their issues and to formulate actions to solve these issues. And in the more recent times, we've certainly had to become very action-orientated. In the past, we probably were more policy-orientated, but nowadays, there's lots of action that takes place. They, as an organization, are firmly entrenched in property rights, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm really going to talk about the objectives 3 and 4 and maybe 5 in terms of the organization striving for the general welfare of all aspects of farm and rural life through economic opportunity, protection of rights, social advancements, and educational improvement. Importantly, for the work that we're going to discuss today, that Guanalu seeks a safe and secure rural community environment. And we look at that by strengthening the rural economy through job creation, through mindset change and entrepreneurship, mentoring and clustering, much like the formula that Lynette has discussed earlier. And then we advocate for family farmers, agriculture, farm businesses, rural landowners, and the various communities through the different activities that Guanalu does. So essentially, what does it mean for us, the stability and prosperity of the rural and formal sector? And this just shows a couple of our activities that we conducted last year, our work in the rural communities. And this is one of the tools that we use to strengthen stability and prosperity in our areas of KwaZulu-Natal. So for many of your listeners and those who've joined us today, they might not understand that, of course, KwaZulu-Natal is the best province. Do have to say that up front. And that we are a complex province in the sense that a lot of the other provinces don't have an Ngoyama Trust. And so living together in the old Natal and the old KwaZulu, remember, came together in the early 90s, and we formed KwaZulu-Natal. That then meant that a lot of our commercial farmers that were already farming in Natal ended up with pockets, and it's like the little fingers that come together, fingers of Ngoyama Trust within the commercial farming sector. So that means we actually cannot ignore our neighbors. We cannot ignore the communities in which we live. And so that integration means that we have to work very closely in our communities. So what happened in July 2021? Well, that illustrated to all of us the absolute importance of not living side by side, but integrating our activities far more closely. So I'm just showing a couple of the traumatic times that we went through in KZN. I don't think anybody who's been through a morning where you are waking up, getting out of your bed, and you hear gunshots, and you think to yourself, was that a car backfiring? No, it wasn't. My husband says that's a 9mm. I think, oh my goodness, where has this been shot? And so we ended up in July 2021, suddenly being faced with the reality of what can happen if we don't address these issues of poverty alleviation, joblessness, youth unemployment, whatever the social ills that you spoke about earlier, Senzi. So this came to us face to face. And they're just a couple of slides. I don't even want to dwell on them for too long. I can just feel myself being traumatized instantly. And so we go through what happened in KZN. Obviously, we've never got to the bottom of what happened in KZN, but for any of us who lived in KZN and had to live through this, we'll never forget it. So those were the scenes that greeted us literally for that first week of July. And so, it was accompanied by massive destruction of property. The important economic routes in our provinces were closed off. There was burning of infrastructure. There was looting of shops. But there was a great unrest that suddenly said to us, things have got to change. And so there's nothing like something like that happening that suddenly says to you, we need to get more actively involved. And so again, just to have a look, what did that mean to us as a province? And this just shows the importance of collecting stats. I went and I looked last night at my diary for July 2021. And every single day, I'm very, very anti-meetings, but every single day of that July, we had unrest meetings. And those meetings were incredibly important for us to be able to gather stats, accurate, meaningful statistics, so we could know what was happening on a day-to-day, sometimes even hour-to-hour basis of what was going on in the province. And this map then illustrates what happened and where were the incidents. So there are 57 pins on this map, but it shows that not only were there was great unrest and destruction in our rural towns, because it was mainly in these rural towns that I'm illustrating where the activities happened, but there was also destruction of very important agro-processing facilities, like the sugar refinery in Durban, the sugar mills, some of the Eskom substations, and of course, our pet favorite is our Mooi River Toll Plaza. So for anything that's going to come into our province and head off and be exported in Durban through the port, it needs to come down that N3 through Mooi River down to the port of Durban. And so the blocking of that Mooi River Toll Plaza effectively blocked all the other provinces, plus the SADC countries, from getting their economic stuff, whatever they wanted to get through and to export. They were blocked at that spot from getting through to the port. But more importantly, there was a lot of unrest in the areas delivering milk through to the various dairies. And so this then said, okay, I'm not going to dwell on that any further. Now, what should we do? So that essentially then started us, very unlike our work that we'd ever done in Konalu before, to say we can't sit on our hands. We are able to gather many parties together to have discussions from the national level, from the police, from the intelligence, etc., all the way down to the local levels, the farmer associations, very important in terms of the organization, the way that organized agriculture is organized, local farmers associations. So you're able to go from a crisis at a provincial level right down to what is happening at the local level, farm by farm, town by town, city by city. So everybody gathered every single day, and we formulated jointly an action plan. First thing was the people were in crisis. The retailers had been looted. Some of the towns, like Little Bulwer, had been completely burnt down. how were the people going to eat? So an immediate humanitarian crisis had to be organized. And so we said, well, we'll do it. So we did it. We were able to gather then more than 15 partners. Of course, we didn't do it on our own. Just like Lynette said, it's impossible for any of us to do anything on our own. We gathered together a number of NGOs, a number of humanitarian partners. We were able to get donations of critical food from all the other provinces. Many provinces provided money to be able to make sure that food could be transported, and we were able to help literally in 2 weeks 500,000 people. We were able to feed people from Josini at the top of the province down to Port Shepstone at the bottom of the province. We were able to get people food so they were able to eat. And all of that happened with 15 partners working together in absolute joy in order to be able to know that we were changing people's lives and we were making a difference. But beyond that, we then said, all right, now we've seen what's really going on. We've also seen how important rural safety and security is, not only to the farmers, because obviously Kwanali has members, farmer members, but also to the rural towns, the economy of the rural towns, and more importantly, to the communities that live in the Ngoyama Trust lands. And for many people who drive up the N3 and they might go into the Berg and they might go up to Pongola, they never really see what Ngoyama Trust is all about. You need to be able to go up the road from Howick, off to Mpentle, off to Lutini, and start seeing how many people in our province live in our deep rural areas and depend on the facilities and the infrastructure that we've got in place to be able to eat every day. So, for example, we helped orphanages in Mpentle. We helped, AIDS centres in Mpentle because they were not able to get food to their children that needed food at that stage. But the big question was, how do we avoid this in the future? How do you make sure that people don't become so desperate? We won't worry about the reasons why it happened, but people are desperate. Lynette also identified that very clearly in her presentation. There is desperation that's going on. You look at the results from her surveys. How do we address those critical issues that she identified? And so we also said, well, we need to look beyond being a policy driver at Kwanalu. We need to be able to start thinking about how do we drive something that's going to be meaningful in our rural areas. In other words, we want to be able to change people from being job seekers, in other words, going to the outskirts of the towns, living in shanty towns, living on the outskirts of Durban, Pietermaritzburg. As I was flying up to Pretoria last night, you can see those towns dotted all the way around along the N3 as you drive to Johannesburg. How do you make sure that people stop seeking jobs, but instead we start looking at opportunities to create jobs? Because I think that if we create jobs, my respect and dignity as a person, as an individual, as a human, is so much better improved when I feel that I'm doing something meaningful for my family, for my community, and I can even create jobs within our businesses that I then can create. And so we looked then at creating a rural entrepreneurship program, and we again underpinned it some very important things. And the one important criteria is leadership. Because if you can't lead yourself, goodness gracious, you're never going to lead anybody. And so we always start our programs with an element of leadership. How do I lead myself? My money, very good lesson for us all to learn. My community and my business. And so that is really where we start. And then we use a number of different service providers. We've used the Street Business School that Lynette spoke about before, a stunning program. So we utilize different partners to bring in the business element of what we do. And then, of course, we go on and we provide mentorship to the different groups. And so here is the launch of one of our programs, basically looking at what do. We use agriculture as a means to develop, first of all, producers, because that's the wonderful thing about the agricultural value chain, producers, traders, and service providers, all important in our value chain. And research has shown that if you improve those three elements of our value chain, you automatically start lifting the economy of the area where you've got service providers and traders and producers working. And so we do as well business skills training, we do business incubation, and we're starting also more recently to scale up the operations of the people that we've been working with in order to be able to transform our sector, that we can get commercial Black farmers operating in our agricultural sector. So that's another win for our entrepreneurship program. We don't only work with the crop farmers. I've never been an animal girl, but I've had to learn how to love goats and cattle, chickens and rabbits. But we also look at then at supporting veld management programs, livestock programs. So we don't only look at one enterprise, we try and look at the enterprise that's best suited for the bioclimatic conditions where our participants find themselves. And then Quinali's also done some very big important work in bringing unemployed graduates, normally agricultural graduates, but we've had others in more recent years, into the workplace. And everybody who works in our current program at Quinali has come through this graduate program and been employed and slowly started going up the ranks, learning more responsibility and looking for new jobs in more exciting places if they wanted that. So just to look at the impact of what we call our Women and Youth and Rural Entrepreneurship Program, we call it WIRE. We started off obviously at the end of 2021 with some pilot projects, and then we moved on from then, and we've carried on working on this program. In the early years, we started with about 860 women that were trained. And the most amazing thing about agriculture and getting into agricultural production is that you can make money very quickly. You might not make loads of it, but you can make money. So after 6 months of starting that program, and in this program, Lima were one of our service providers and partners, we were able to see a decrease of nearly 30% of the families in the areas relying on the people who were working in towns to provide them with remittances. So there was a great move to become self-sufficient. And we also then found that there was a total income increase very quickly of about 20%. So those numbers were checked and audited. So that was the most amazing result. And it spurred us on then to carry on with the program. This one, 8,600 livelihoods were impacted in terms of the families that we worked with. Then we carried on and we got more adventuresome, and we looked at perhaps putting in a little starter fund in 2024. When we started this, I was very, very hesitant about the 10,000 Rand. I said 10,000 Rand is going to do nothing for anybody in a rural enterprise. I had to eat my words on about 20 occasions, because 10,000 Rand turned into the most remarkable startup fund for those who were committed and disciplined in the way that they were going to approach their farming activities. And so of that, we were able to get, in most instances, an ROI, return of investment, of 132%. You can't get that anywhere else. You know, we had to go back and check our figures because we thought this is absolutely impossible. But it can happen in agriculture, can happen in our deep rural areas, and it can happen with 10,000 Rand of a Kickstarter funding. And so again, then we've gone through, we've totally supported nearly 1,500 women and youth. The same as Lynette, we're very focused in terms of the people we'd like to uplift in our deep rural areas, women and youth. And to date, then that's obviously, you know, nearly 14,400 livelihoods and 144,000 that we generally work out in the families that we've impacted. And more excitingly, for all of those who love cattle, we've been able to have a most successful partnership with the Red Meat Organization. And we were able to work with 7,000 emerging livestock farmers. That work continues in order to get them to understand a lot about the activities they're involved in, but also to drive them into sustainable practices. So another add-on in terms of what we were doing. Just a little bit of a side kick on the left-hand side of the slide, that, you know, you can't take away from the work that Hancock has done in terms of what entrepreneurs in the informal sector provide into our economy. So just to remind us, I've put those figures down there, but it's something that we need to remember. We must never poo-poo what goes on in the informal sector. For those who operate completely in the formal sector, that's what their lives depend on. And I think it's a very unrecognized contribution to our economy. And so again, then, just looking at some of the young people delivering inputs in terms of the 10,000 Starter Up Fund project, that we are looking at strengthening land reform in our own way, rural safety and security, building communities through business, job creation. And we also look at the mindset change, the leadership component, entrepreneurship, mentorship, and clustering. Many of these guys have never worked together before. So again, we're organized agriculture. We love to organize everybody into clusters, into groups, so that we can work with them more easily than having 144,000 individuals that we need to work with. But the difference between then what Lynette spoke about and what Quinali does now, and this is where you have to have an operation like this in an organized agricultural organization, is that Quinali has what they call a security desk. And the security desk operates from a provincial to a national level. And it's able to gather stats, details on attacks, murders, you name it. So getting back to what you started with, Senzi, the actual stats, the actual facts about what goes on, at least in KwaZulu-Natal. So the security desk is first on the crime usually, assists the farmers, or the informal farmers, it doesn't matter who they are, assist them to make sure that the scene of the crime is closed off relatively quickly, and that the police are able to do their jobs without anybody having, disturbed the scene of the crime, so to say. And they then gather the details and the statistics, and they are responsible for working with the different structures of SAPS in our province right to the national level. And they're able to advise our farmers on any criminal activities that are taking place so that they don't do anything that is not within the law. They integrate into our associations, provide feedback into the associations so everybody knows what's going on, liaise with the many stakeholders that are involved with rural safety and security. They've got guideline documents, been called in even to provide evidence in court cases sometimes, and of course an analysis on the farm attacks and murders that are available to be presented to any of the external stakeholders if they really want to see the facts, at least in KwaZulu-Natal. And the rural and the security desk then has a very much a hands-on. We're all about getting involved in the mud and getting our boots dirty and actually being there when we're required. And so now coming back to how you introduced, so if we look at what's happened in KwaZulu-Natal, and you just look at the murders, which is the red line for the audience, and the white, which is the total attacks. So in other words, when you have an attack on a farm, but nobody's murdered and some people could be seriously injured. Going back to 2002, actual recorded facts. You just look at what's happened in KwaZulu-Natal. So I can't say this is only due to the work that Quinali's been doing, because obviously there's a lot of other parties that are involved in the way and the work that we do in these deep rural areas. But you can't deny that there's been a huge improvement in terms of our rural safety and security. And it's often gathering people together and understanding the environment that we work in, before anything happens. And so then if we go to look at, what have we learned? What are our lessons that we've learned? So first of all, everybody has to be involved. It can't be somebody else's job. It can't be somebody else is going to do this. Somebody else is going to save me. No one's going to save me. Got to be involved. And that's why at least organized agriculture with its organized structures is able to get the word out very rapidly. So we encourage everyone to be able to join their organized structures, to be able to be actively involved at the local levels. So be involved, be informed. Don't talk about facts that don't exist. Don't cause drama where drama is not required to be caused. Be sure of your facts when you're going to speak about your facts, so that if anyone challenges, you can prove what you're talking about. That's very important. And in everything that Quinali does, they love to be fact-based. So that's important. Be proactive. So the programs that we set up, it's our way of being proactive. It's a voluntary association. We rely on funding. We don't get loads of money. It's not like we're creating widgets and we can use the widget money to fund our programs. So there's only so much we can do, but we're doing as much as we can within the resources that we have. Build relationships with stakeholders. I think Lynette also reiterated that. Got to work with your people on the ground. We never go into any area on our own. We engage with our councillors, we engage with our government partners, whether it's LED or AGRIC. Everybody knows why we're there. And very often everybody there knows to look out for me because I'm obviously very easy to spot. So, so we're there. We work with our stakeholders. We build and strengthen community unity. Again, these are the programs that will build and strengthen. The people will be able to start addressing their own issues. So we had a group that we worked with in 2021 that had no electricity in their area that they live in out in the Valley of 1,000 Hills. A whole group of women found each other through our program, joined hands, marched off down to Eskom, to eThekwini first of all, to sort out their issue. Within 2 weeks, the whole area had power again. So that's the power of people coming together and realizing together they're much stronger than just bleating on the sidelines on their own. Be compassionate, because if we're not compassionate and we don't treat each other with dignity and respect, we're not going to go forward as a nation. So that's our premise, our ethics and our values. Be compassionate, understand, stand in other people's shoes. Our backgrounds and our circumstances are so different. And then at the end of the day, work together to create a better country. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Wow. Thank you. I mean, you said something so powerful at the beginning of your presentation. You said, we cannot ignore our neighbors. And that really touched me. And I think it speaks to even this point you've spoken about being compassionate. And I know that during the 2021 unrest, there was so much focus on the security element, which is understandable. But what Kwanalu has done is taken, quite a deeper, broader approach of saying, how could we actually be proactive and prevent this and address the drivers that led to the KZN unrest? So thank you, and we applaud the team. We will now hear from our last discussant.
Sorry, Senzi, I always remember, I think it was President Mandela who started off his presidency when he said, we can't be rich countries in a poor neighborhood. And that's always remained on my mind, I can't live in my rich mansion where I'm living, where my neighbors are struggling. So that's basically where the great thought comes from, not from Kathy Hurney. Thanks, Cindy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kathy. So we will now hear from our last speaker, who is our discussant, Thamsanqa Mzaku, who is the director of Papama Initiative, and he will be reflecting on the two presentations that were shared by Lynette and Kathy. Since 2017, Thamsanqa has been managing director of Papama Initiative, a peace-building NGO based in Soweto, and he has 25 years of experience managing various projects, including an HIV and AIDS education program, the Alternatives to Violence program, which Lynette also referred to, which empowers individuals and organizations to find alternative ways to violence, to resolving conflict. And he's also been involved in a project called Making a Living, which looks at taking a holistic approach to addressing food security issues in rural communities. But Thamsanqa, as I call him, is also a driver group member of the Violence Prevention Forum, and we really look forward to your reflections. Over to you, but Thamsanqa.
No, thank you, Sis Senzi. As I will also refer to you. I hope I'm audible enough.
You are.
Thank you. As you have introduced me, that perhaps I will be looking at the areas of reflection based on what both Kathy and Lynette have presented, but perhaps just in a way of introduction of what we do as well. As Papama initiatives, as we have mentioned, that we find ourselves also working in rural areas. Of course, being an organization that is based in an urban area, in a township in Soweto, our work is not limited to rural areas. We find ourselves also working in other peri-urban areas. We are not in KZN, unlike Lynette and Kathy, but our work in rural areas will be in Limpopo, the Venda area to be specific, but we are also in the Free State as well, where we work. Of course, our province, Gauteng. So what we also do is perhaps acknowledging what has already been mentioned, the combination of sort of interventions, right? There's not just one intervention that can address areas of safety in the areas that we work in. So we also work in combination of all those things. Some of them that have been mentioned, the food security. Lynette got me excited there when she spoke about Alternatives to Violence Project, AVP, that we also work in. We have colleagues, by the way, in the KZN that are responsible for AVP in KZN, but we also find some colleagues in the Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape. There is us and others in Gauteng. What got me excited is that now I know we have colleagues in the Northern Cape. So those are kind of work areas that we also involved in, your conflict resolution work, your mediation work, food security work, but also this area of community involvement using a very useful tool called asset-based community mapping, which perhaps points to what Kathy has mentioned about how do you identify assets within the area that you live in, instead of migrating and try to find job elsewhere. So identify those assets and start making a living out of those assets, and perhaps that's the rationale behind the name of our program called Making a Living, which is a holistic approach that involves everything. But maybe when I get to the reflective points, I will also highlight some of these interventions, examples of some of these interventions that we also get ourselves involved in. So whenever one talks safety or violence prevention, immediately what comes to mind to some people is policing or law enforcement. Some would also take it to an extent of conflict resolution, of course, others mediation. How do we get involved in such things? But what we are learning from both presentations is that it's not just that. It is also about the economic issues, the gaps that you would find in our economic settings, or rather economic conditions. And it's about addressing that. So we are learning, for example, that the entire community has to be involved. But other partners as well. Other partners has to be they have to be involved. You can't just do it and go it alone. We are learning, of course, that food security is also key. Maybe the rationale behind these programs and perhaps framing this conversation around safety strategies in rural areas is the benefit of the accessibility to farming or farming land or land that you can use to produce food in rural areas in the main, as opposed to the urban areas. But the question therefore would be, wouldn't these interventions be applicable to urban areas as well? As working in peri-urban areas, find that some of them can be. Because if you are addressing both food security as well as economic issues, we know, for example, that in townships, in rural areas, in mostly what you would refer to as marginalized communities, there is income that is coming from various areas through our government social security programs, right? So that would include what Lynette spoke about, your social employment fund and so forth. So there is income that is coming in. But that income also goes out as quickly as it comes in those communities, be it rural or urban. They just do that, especially if these are vulnerable areas. So if you are to address these areas, you also are looking at using farming methods as well that can work even in other areas, like growing trees. In some of these areas, we have initiated projects where we are growing fruits and nut trees. Now, this is a community or collective prosperity initiative. How do you then, at the end, aggregate the produce and take it to markets as one element? But also you would have saved the income that came through into those communities when people have also developed some, food gardens in their homes. Then instead of using some of that money to buy vegetables, that money can be, can stay longer within their circulation and be used for other things, meaning that the element of disposable income increases as far as that is concerned. So perhaps that could be the relationship between these initiatives in rural areas and urban areas, but perhaps that is a reflective point. Can they work? What is it that we can do? Is there a relationship? Of course, the rural areas have the advantage, a lot of the advantage when it comes to the land, the accessibility of land. But also, what is it that we are learning in terms of these strategies in rural areas? Can these strategies work in a rural area in Limpopo as much as it can work in a rural area in the KZN? What are perhaps the issues that may bring, or common issues, or perhaps issues of divergence in those areas where we can say, look, this cannot work here, this can work here. So what are the issues that KZN would be dealing with in terms of safety, for example? I mean, the example of the July unrest, we've seen it mainly in the KZN. We did not really see it in many other rural or in other provinces where you'd have a lot of rural environment, right? What could have been the factor? Is it because some rural areas have a strong culture or deep-rooted culture of violence versus others? Violence meaning the physical violence as it were. If you go to rural areas, what could be the other, issues of safety that they're dealing with? I would say, for example, in areas like Limpopo, we know that many of the cases that we deal with in those rural areas have to do mainly with your violence against women and children, and perhaps that would be, taken from the fact that they are informed by the culture of patriarchy, perhaps that is still, entrenched in those areas. And therefore, when you are talking safety issues, perhaps though your safety strategies, perhaps your safety strategies would also want to address that mainly in that type of a rural environment compared to a different type of rural environment. So perhaps that is another area perhaps that we want to look at when we also think of the strategies. But of course, I think it can be generic in some areas, especially when we have to address the areas of economy. Lynette also spoke about one other important issue of water and sanitation. We know that in these rural areas, water also becomes, it happens all over South Africa these days. It becomes a scarce resource these days, so it's difficult. So it's also an interesting area. How do we get to address that? But married to that is the issue of the climate change, right? Where one of the areas that create conditions which make it difficult to have safe and peaceful environments is climate change. And it can be destructive, as we have seen in many other rural environments as well. And perhaps the interventions that we are also looking at when we're dealing with this is about that. How do we encourage our rural communities to make sure that we prevent such, calamities, as it were. And then the area of, I think you spoke a lot about it, Kathy, the area of integrating different communities, your learnings from the Natal and the merger into KwaZulu, or the combination of both, made it, it makes the differences glaring, and how to manage them. It becomes one interesting area of learning. The example of the Ingonyama Trust. Ingonyama Trust is in KwaZulu-Natal, but the traditional authority exists in perhaps all rural environments. And how much of a challenge do we get from even the traditional authority in trying to get, to unify these communities? Sensei, in your opening, you reminded us about the reality that we are dealing with as well in South Africa, the attention that we got internationally about the farm murders and stuff, and we learned even new terms now known as white genocide and all those kind of things. So that integration perhaps is one element, perhaps that it would be an area of interest. How do we get it right? But how much of these interventions are creating safety even in those environments where farmers are attacked, and in the main it should be the white farmers who would complain about that, even though we know for the fact that it's not just white farmers who are attacked or get killed through as a result of criminal activities. Perhaps the last area that I would touch on is the interesting evolution from response to prevention, which I think Kathy highlighted. I think learning from the 2021 unrest, how then that resulted into many other initiatives that are now recognizing the importance of what can be done to prevent such issues from recurring or occurring in the first place, even those that we do not know that have not yet occurred. And that is mainly about, or the work of violence prevention really, is to prevent things from happening even before you see them. Which I think I will end there in my reflection, but I'm aware that a lot of other areas would be reflected on, which I did not even touched on. My time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Samsanga, for those rich reflections. We have now reached the Q&A session of our webinar, and you would have seen a survey pop up on your screen. And this is just an evaluation that really helps us to see what the value of the webinar is and to also get feedback of what we could do differently. So we'd really be grateful if you completed the short survey. But now I open the floor to any questions or reflections to the both presentations, or to also to the reflections that Tamsanga shared. You can unmute yourself, raise your hand. Ideally, it would be nice to see people's faces, or also put your question in the chat. So anyone who has questions, you can feel free to raise your hand now. Okay, I don't see any questions or hands at the moment. And I also don't see any questions in the chat. Yes, Kathy?
I'm sorry that we've got to be answering and asking ourselves our own questions. But one thing I thought about is that we should find a way to better integrate and understand who's working in different areas. Because just listening to the scope of the work that, for example, Lima does throughout the country, and obviously you try and work with as many of the partners that you've got locally, but again, coming back to collecting information and stats, it would be maybe nice to find a way of mapping some of these activities so that if you trot into an area, it's not always easy to know who else is working there. You can find your government partners, you can find your LED, you can, that is easy. I can find my commercial farmers, but not always easy to know who else is active and how can we integrate so I'm not repeating what another organization has done and thereby, wasting valuable resources. Thanks, Senzi.
Thanks, Kathy. That's a very powerful point, and one that we've definitely reflected on in other spaces, the power of databases and knowing who the partners are. Elijah, I saw your hand. I am handing over if you still want to share your reflections or ask a question. Elijah, are you still with us?
On the chat, Senzi.
Hello, presenter.
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, thanks,
Okay.
Kathy. If you can, please voice your question.
Okay, thank you. It goes this. Okay, I sent it through the chat. I don't know if it's visible. I said, what are the best food practices? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I said, what are the best food security strategies that are effective and efficient required to safeguard targeted farmers being killed or murdered and their crops destroyed in rural communities? That's one question. The second one goes this way. How can agricultural productivity be enhanced when most GMO seeds are reported on various social media spaces that such seeds or seedlings depopulate human race? Why the third and last question goes this way. What are the best practices required to put a stop to the attacks on farmers where rule of law and appropriate security system has been disenfranchised? Majority of the law enforcers and military are being bought, while others are ethno-religious bigots. In some communities, you see the security members are no longer interested in safeguarding the community, the persons in the community, because of their demands for money, their quest for money. And everybody is looking for his pocket. while some are ethnically some persons are tribalistic and religiously bigot. So that's why I ask question. I need answers to this thread. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elijah. I also see that there's a question from Emmanuel who says that I want to know how we can ensure the sustainability of community-led safety mechanisms once the external partners and funding are no longer available. So if maybe Lynette, you can take that last question, and then the 3 questions posed by Elijah, if Kathy, whichever ones you can actually respond to, and with Tamsanga as well, I think you can reflect on the question by Emmanuel. And let's aim for about a minute each in terms of reflections. And I think that should bring us right to past where we can close. So maybe starting with the questions from Elijah, any reflections, Kathy?
Cynthia, I think the most important thing we need to realize is that our leaders lead us. And in these different deep rural areas, leadership is a key trait in order to be able to make sure that your safety and security mechanisms are in place. And so part of the strategy would be to include, as we've done in some of our northern Zululand activities, to include the tribal leaders, whether it's the Indunas or Nkosi. Sometimes we've had the Nkosis come to training, so they start to understand the important elements of leadership. And very often they haven't been exposed to ideas about leadership. And so we start with building strong leaders. Those strong leaders then in turn can lead their communities, as well as dealing with the government, various government departments that have to deliver, for example, on safety and security. I mean, it's a very long journey to get safe communities if you started to have problems like Elijah identifies. And if the rule of law is not operating, it's difficult to institute a rule of law. And it starts at the core of the matter, which are your leaders. Yeah. We have found with the Rural Safety and Security desk, we've helped quite a lot of our rural farmers start being involved in the various fora, that they can start raising their issues at the SAPS level, and suddenly they are being not disregarded, but they're being taken into account. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Lynette, your reflections on Emmanuel's question?
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's always an implementer's biggest fear is that when you leave a community for whatever reason, whether it was funding coming to an end or whatever, that the impact that you had created comes to an end. We feel the first sort of area you need to focus on is making sure that you've completely understood and unearthed what the issues are right up front. Often they don't come out initially in discussions with communities what the safety and issues are. And obviously, after a long engagement with them, and the longer the better as an implementer, the more depth and understanding you get of what the real issues are. So communicating and talking with communities and not coming in with your own ideas of what the problem is first, I think is critical. Obviously, there's an element of building skills within the communities around initiatives they feel could benefit their safety. And things like the Alternative to Violence program, really develops individuals within their community that know how to handle situations. So there is a component of that. But for me, I think the most important is almost what Kathy was sort of saying around leadership and ownership of programs. There's no point in the program being viewed as a Lima program or a Kwanalu program. It has to be viewed, and ownership has to be taken by the community. This is our program. We've developed it. We've structured it the way we want to implement it. We've addressed the issues we feel are the most important. So really getting that sort of structure ownership. And there are incredible leadership structures within our communities, especially rural communities, whether it's through the tribal authorities, whether it's through an individual organization that's very strong, a church group, something like that. You often find a very well-led organization within the community, which if they take ownership and understanding of the situation, once we leave, they continue with that work and they continue being a support service to that. So that's my little nuggets of gold that I've learned over the years. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lynette. And we have run out of time. Apologies, Butamsanga, as you wouldn't now have time to reflect. But I do want to thank our speakers, Lynette, Kathy, and Butamsanga, for your reflections, your deep contributions. I think what I take away from this webinar is just the importance of, working deeply within communities and knowing that it's not just about security, but about restoring dignity and empowering these communities. The webinar was recorded and will be available on YouTube and the ISS website. Thank you for joining us. And the next webinar in our series will be on the 27th of August, and the advert will be shared again on the ISS platforms as well as through the Violence Prevention newsletter. Thank you and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Inzi. Thanks, everyone. Bye.